Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee, and today I'm doing what I usually do. I'm having a candid, curious conversation on arts and culture, and today I am pleased to be in conversation with a multimedia artist and producer living and working in Baltimore, good old Baltimore. For the past 10 years, my guest has produced film, music videos, arts installations, live events, and photographic work. Please welcome Travis Levasseur. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for having me and saying my name the way that my mom always said it.
It got real choppy at the end. It's like something slapped me. It was like, say it this way. So thank you for joining the pod. And as we get started, I got to do the sort of customary thing that either you can talk about for a long time, or you're like, look, can we move on? Tell us about yourself. What's your story? And in there, can you tell us about your background and maybe your first experience with art or creativity?
Yeah, sure. So I was born in Richmond, Virginia in 1991. So not too far away, kind of like a little Baltimore. It kind of felt like when I first moved here. I was like, oh, this is a big Richmond. My parents were both in the what some people call functional arts. So like my dad is a construction worker and my mom is an interior designer. And my mom's interests were very much in furniture and stained glass. She did stained glass on the side as her practice and actually worked at a little stained glass studio at the Edgar Allan Poe House in downtown Richmond, which I think is the one he was born in. It's one of those confusing things where he's claimed by everyone, but we got him because he died.
He's ours.
He's ours. So, yeah, my first sort of exposure to art was my mom dragging me to every single church, and we didn't grow up super religious, so it was kind of experiencing the art of these buildings and craft as a way to tell stories, through a language that I wasn't sort of indoctrinated in growing up. My sister went to Catholic school, but my parents weren't Catholic. And so, yeah, that was sort of my first experience with it. And because my parents were both sort of makers and builders, they sort of encouraged me, and I felt that I wanted to become an architect, which of course did not happen. But it was sort of the cross between these things. So, growing up, there were Frank Lloyd Wright books all over the place, fancy chairs, coffee table books, sure. that kind of vibe, sort of the design aspect of yeah. Like I said, because they were somewhat supportive, and because they were sort of makers in their own right, I was encouraged to, or felt comfortable, I guess is the more correct way to say it. I felt comfortable pursuing sort of the creative arts in my academic career, just like through elementary school, middle school, and feel like I got a lot of encouragement doing a lot of woodworking from my dad and my mom, and all of that helped foster this sort of trajectory that got me to where I am today. So I was lucky in that, like other people on your podcast, actually from Virginia, I went to one of the regional art public schools, art magnet schools, which Baltimore has one too. It's called Carver. It's basically the same sort of thing. People apply, you get in, and then it's a public school. And so it pulls people from a larger region. Mine was in Petersburg, Virginia. So I took a bus 45 minutes south of town went through the Philip Morris factory and took a bus on the interstate and then got off in Petersburg. But it was great. And it had a dark room. And sort of that's where I felt like I was first discovering something that was process-based. And there was a really wonderful teacher who taught the darkroom and who worked in all sorts of media. And it was kind of the first time that I was like, oh my God, you don't have to just be like a painter or a drawer or a photographer or a filmmaker or whatever. You can be this person. She painted, she created mixed media sculptures. She was in the darkroom producing, photographs, but also experimental media where you're playing with the light and the exposure of the paper and pushing those boundaries. And she was just super inspirational to me and encouraged me to apply to art school. And so that's how I ended up in Baltimore. I ended up choosing MICA, and it was there that I declared my major in film. And I think that I did that. Well, I know that I did it because of how I felt at the time, and I remember that I did it because as much as I loved photography and I loved graphic design and all that sort of stuff that I had all this experience with, I was super eager and curious to try something new. And filmmaking felt like the next step of photography. I was sort of like following the trajectory of the history of the medium. I was like, well, what happened after this? And it's like, oh, the images moved. Okay, well, what's up with that? Like, let's study that.
Move it, guys, eh?
Yeah, and I'm sure somewhere in there it's like, oh, also you're supposed to be able to make money off of this in the back of my mind too. But that hasn't happened, of course. But it didn't like hurt with my parents that I was studying something that could be commercialized, even though I have disappointed them. No, I haven't disappointed them, but I haven't gone that route yet.
That's funny. I like that you described some of that period where it just sounded like you were around like folks that was just supportive. Your family was just supportive of you, just kind of having an interest in some of the stuff that they were doing and ultimately kind of finding your own like lane in there. Like, all right, what's this next thing? Or even being around like in school and things of that sort. We all have some version of it, whether it's I got tight and someone was just like, you should make this work, or having that sort of support. I think having that support allows you to maybe explore and maybe just kind of float without a destination at the end, but really make interesting, soul enriching work.
Yeah, it's really everything. I think to have that support from somewhere, to whether it's it could be a teacher at 1 year of your education that sort of was doing something that you really jived with, or but yeah, having the support in your family is, of course, I mean, they're supportive in so many ways. They want you to do good at, or my parents wanted me to do good at something, and it wasn't, sports weren't working out. And, it's not like I wasn't bad at all the things they also wanted me to be good at, but that they were open to whatever was, I think, the big thing for me, and trying out lots of different things.
I have a bag in the studio in my closet that it was like my art bag when I was drawing covers of, like, I used to try to draw covers of Wizard magazine back in the day. And that cool. Bag has all of these old comics that, it's just like, I remember my dad got this for me, or my grandmother gave me the bag, or I had these color pencils are dried out. I mean, these markers are dried out. They're of no use, but it was a gift. And it was one of these things of early on, there was, we're supporting you and this is how we think we can do it. And being in a completely sort of different media, but doing something that is creative and something that's interesting. They're like, I'm not sure what to get you, but I know you use very specific stuff, so we're not going to try, but here's a gift card to Sweetwater, or here's a gift card to wherever to get these cables or whatever you need.
Oh, yes.
So it's always still that support.
The watercolor sets from every aunt, once you're the art person, you're getting watercolor sets forever.
Yeah, I have this one book that I got because I was really into comics, drawing comics, and it's like how to draw comics like whatever this famous like comic guy. Wasn't a big name person I was aware of, but it's like, what's his credits from? You work for Marvel, bro? Who are you working for? And but it was just like, oh, I'm getting something out of this. And I just listening to what you were describing just reminds me of that time. I don't know. It just hits me. So I want to ask about, tell me about like, a work, an exhibition, creative experience that had a profound impact on you early on in pursuing your work on this sort of artistic journey. I think for me, it's always been like talk radio. I would listen to like maybe either talk radio or something that had some of those sort of weird news stories that they only spend like 5 minutes on. That's how I got started in podcasting, and it got to a point where I was covering the stories at the same time they were covering them. And then I got to a point where I was covering them before they would pop up on the news or in these sort of radio shows. I was like, okay, I got something on my hands here, and this is very interesting. And I think this sort of interest that I have, I can build something out of it. And so that's what that would be for me. What would that thing be for you?
You know, my work is so all over the place, especially right now, that I think the things that I thought of when you're asking this question are kind of late, like probably like senior year of college, probably. Because through undergrad, I was trying out all these different techniques and mediums and kind of throwing the spaghetti at the wall and seeing what happened. And then I was making a couple trips up to New York, and I saw these two shows. The first being Janet Cardiff's 40-part motet. I just happened across it, PS1, and it was this one of the big. I can't remember what they call those rooms, but there's these like much larger exhibition spaces, sort of stacked on top of each other at one end of the museum. I can't remember, but it was a circle of, I can't remember. Oh, 40 speakers, because that's the name of all standing like 5-something feet in the air.
Yeah.
And she recorded someone singing on each speaker, and they come together in a circle to create this incredible immersive experience. Wow. Where you're walking around these speakers that are human height, you know, they're coming together in this really amazing, powerful way, but you're interacting with these inanimate objects in a way that as you're going up to the speakers, you feel as though you're like getting in their space. Like, even though it's just an inanimate object, you're interacting with something that could be happening from a human, but you're not. You're able to experience it in an incredibly passive way, or, interactive way that is like kind of just like, it just like blew my brain, where I was like, whoa. And it was time-based. So I felt like there were all these things going on with technology and time and emotion, and it just, all these things came together for me for the first time, where I was able to experience something like that in person, because it was in a museum that happened to, really support that kind of strange work that you don't really get to see other places. And then the other show, similar year, was in 2013. There was this Paul McCarthy show at the Park Avenue Armory. And it was bonkers. I had never seen anything like this before. It was this enormous armory space, like, probably like the one that we have near Howard Street. Like, it was that kind of building. Yeah, it was this enormous building on the inside. And they built like this enormous enchanted forest in the middle, and they built his childhood home, and he reenacted himself like with prosthetics as like this weird horny Walt Disney character in his childhood home. Like, they're spraying chocolate everywhere, and all of the videos are playing enormous on the sides of this enormous space in a triptych, like all at once.
Yeah.
While you can walk among all the sets they filmed these in. So you can smell the chocolate, you can see the spaces they filmed. Then they built, what do you call it? When you like rebuild a human out of like silicone, like.
Yeah. You get a model out of silicone. Like
models of him in these precarious situations with the other characters in the film. And you're going through the enchanted forest on your own. There were so many ways to experience the work, to tell this crazy story that he made, that it was the first time I'd ever seen story told like that in such a way. Because again, experiencing something like that is not a regular occurrence, as we're, going to local galleries and museums and things like. They're kind of like events. They're these big events that take a ton of resources. So I was just like,
that is definitely. We definitely have a couple questions in that sort of vein. So we're going to put a pin in that and come back to that. Keep that at the top of the, So I want to ask about this, and thank you for walking us through, because now I'm going to be looking up things. I already typed in 40 speakers. I already typed that in because, I like when things kind of push boundaries and change how we receive like creative work or what have you, and also being protective of what it is, because I think, people just need the opportunity to create. And it's like doing the creative mornings thing recently. We talk about how everyone is a creative. Everyone can make work or what have you. And I think starting off at least from that standpoint and really building off of it is important, and to see how far you can go with your vision. Like, I didn't think this would. I remember early on, I've told this story before, that it was surprising to exceed more than 20 interviews. And it's just like, oh yeah, I doubt if you can get that many. It's like, I can talk. It's just, I mean, but it's just finding like people who are interesting. So definitely having a vision and being able to see it. That's the work that's truly interesting for me. But we're going to put a pin in that and go to this next question. So I read that your background includes artist assistant, gallery curator, theater technician, and video producer. In terms of like perspective and perhaps skills, how do you how do these positions or these roles in your background kind of serve your work currently in your art?
Yeah. So I think especially with the jobs in the entertainment industry, the theater and the moving image jobs, I've definitely been incredibly drawn to the gears and levers that humans use to trick themselves for entertainment. And I kind of wanted to experience those things firsthand, like how the sausage is made, how are special effects done. I'm especially interested in practical effects. So theater is an interesting place to be, because those things are, practical effects are still utilized in theater. It's really exciting to see them used in film, but using special effects is something that I've started to do more in my work, something that I'm super interested in. Recently, I've started incorporating robotics along with animation, sort of these things that have their lineage in the entertainment industry, but are sort of being used in an installation context. So exploring these worlds is a curiosity in technique, but also a curiosity in the lineage of something that I didn't necessarily study while I was in school, because even though I did go to school for film, it was at MICA, which is a very interdisciplinary program.
Sure.
So it's kind of fun I feel like I'm walking the line a lot, if that makes any sense.
I get you.
Like someone was talking about it in something I was in yesterday, like that line between performance art and the performing arts is like the context that it was of the history that it's coming from. So I'm interested in techniques from the performing arts, but I'm interested in the lineage of the visual arts or performance art. But
that makes sense. So now we're able to go back into those other ones. I put that in there as a little bit of a buffer, so we're not just talking about Queen. But so like for you, and I touched on like my piece a little bit, but for you, describe a project where you push your vision as far as it could go. Like I think, people use that thing, usually they use it in sports. We left a few yards on the field. We left some points out there. Artists and sports, I mean, it's the same thing, right? So is there an instance that comes to mind for you where you pushed your project and it's like, yeah, that's exactly everything I wanted in there? Or have you always kind of like pushed for that? Because I just want to get a sense of like, is there always you're fully getting everything out there? Or is it one of those things where it's like, we didn't have the budget, we didn't have the time, we didn't have the space or the resources and that sort of thing? So tell me about that and pushing your vision out there.
There's always yards on the field. Always yards on the field. Always so many yards on the field. I mean, for me, I run with concepts for a long time personally. I mean, I have projects that have never been made where I've been running with a concept for what feels like forever. And that's just in the form of applying it for grants and applications and things like that. And the work even grows in that space so much.
Sure.
Just over time, as I grow, as things change, as the news happens, as everything is constantly changing, the work can always keep going. So, I mean, I haven't felt that way about a project yet. Every sort of concept that I've put a bunch of time into, I would absolutely show again in a different way, especially because a lot of the work that I've been doing lately is very specific to the place that it's being shown. So if somebody wanted to see the show that I did at Terrault Contemporary, that's the third iteration of a show. So that work evolved over time 3 times, and it would, everything that I hate about myself and hate about the work in that show, I would try and fix and evolve. So yeah, I always hate it. I mean, I'm just like, oh God, it's never, I always feel so bad when it's time to show, because I'm like, oh, I could always do so much more.
It's the thing about like when they talk about painters, it's like you're never really finished. You're always like tweaking, what have you. And I remember early on when I would do the editing of this podcast, back when I was doing that so many years ago. I mean, I was just flush with cash, Scrooge McDuck here, and Scrooge McTruth here, or Scrooge McPod. That's probably better, Scrooge McPod. I remember I would really go through fine tooth comb style and like trim out like pauses and and all of that stuff. And I would realize it's like I'm leaving what the spirit of this thing is. It sounds too manicured. It sounds too inauthentic. Like there's, and I've said this before, it's a certain degree of contrivance. We're meeting at a certain time. You have a sense of what the questions are going to be and so on. But, it's like, how do you toe that line? And being in both, as you kind of touched on with how you kind of view art or have you, I think being able to toe the line of having like a framework, but being able to free jazz and go away from that at times. But I find that, when it's a little too fine and you're like, well, if this is what my vision is, you start changing what that vision looks like. It's like, well, I can go in here and fix this. And then suddenly you have, George Lucas cleaning up Star Wars. It's like, look, that didn't exist, bro, at the time. You didn't have that CGI at the time, guy.
I mean, I found too that other iterations of the work involve just fucking it up. Yeah. Like there was this one this like MXXIV show that like when I brought it to Baltimore, that it had a life in New York where it existed in a certain way. And then when I brought it back to Baltimore, I was like, you know what? This thing should be destroyed. So I just took a hammer to it all. And the installation was it as rubble. Nice. This pristine model is rubble. And I thought that made more sense anyway. But it kind of had these 2 lives. I probably wouldn't have felt good breaking it if I hadn't had it, if it hadn't lived a life prior to that. I mean, I'd like to get to that point where I can just take a hammer to something if it's meant to be that way and show it. But in that instance, I was like, oh, it had a little life. And
now it's the afterlife.
As a pristine little, worse sculpture in my mind. But
no, I dig it. I mean, I think when people have a method to how they're going about things, and I think it's for other people, right? When it's like, well, why did you do that? It's like, because I wanted to. It was mine. And, I feel it looks better in this way. And I have that it's like transmutation in some ways. I feel like it did its thing. And now it's time to do it in a different way. That's why when I do this podcast and I do, the rapid fire questions, it's me putting the hammer to the goodwill that I've instilled in the guests. Like, oh my God, I trust Rob Lee. Now I'm going to ask some weird questions. So yeah, that's and thank you for sharing that. That's really cool. Boundaries, pushing boundaries. Do you like add anything sort of like uncomfortable to your work within the process when you feel like you're just not feeling it? You feel like you're in that sort of creative rut. I know that I was reminded recently, take breaks, Rob, take breaks. And I was like, no, man, I want to take a break. I'm not going to be good. It's like, take a break. Just, have some sort of break in there. And because I found that I was doing more things that were unintentionally uncomfortable. I was missing like things I needed to be at and just not having energy. And I work in some of these uncomfortable things, just to kind of jog things loose. But when they're not worked in intentionally, it's like, I'm going to leave my charger. I'm going to leave maybe a microphone and I'm going to figure out a way to get that content. But when I'm not doing it intentionally, it's like, I'm not in a rut. I'm like over capacity and I need to try to set some sort of boundary in that regard instead of the artificial, but I think still important ones that I put in to kind of spark the work and make me look at it differently. But what sort of uncomfortables do you put in to set boundaries for yourself when you're creating work?
For me, it doesn't happen when I'm in a rut. I think when it happens is when I've kind of what I was saying earlier, I think that those moments really happen, those sort of that confidence happens when I'm evolving the work. So it doesn't have to be that it showed before or anything like that, but as it's sitting in the studio, if I'm, maybe you're right. Maybe it is kind of, I'm in a rut with that piece. So it'll sit in the studio for a little while and I'll go on to something else. And then when I go back to it, that's when I'll make I'll add something uncomfortable to it. I'll have thought about it for a while, but when I'm generally in a rut, like let's say the studio's not happening, like everything is just sitting, which has happened, especially during COVID. There was some darkness. There was a little bit of darkness in COVID. There was a moment where I was like, what am I doing down here? What am I gonna, in those moments, it becomes more about sort of taking things in. Like I sort of have in my practice like these moments of just like break, but it also allows me to experience more work and maybe take it in differently and listen to more, read more, watch more, and sort of with the lens that you're kind of hunting for what's next. Whereas when I'm doing that sort of in my everyday life, it kind of always works its way into the current project. I'll see something and be like, oh, that really pertains to this. That really pertains to that. But sometimes when I'm in a creative rut and I'm taking in, everything that I just said, it's like, oh, it culminates and becomes maybe what the next project will be. The big project, the big concept, it could be a installation or a script or whatever it is, because right now I'm doing way too many different things. But, that's sort of where I am and sort of how I work in those lulls.
I dig it. I hear about the analog to digital like loop or what have you to kind of jog. I hear about that thing. I try. I don't know where any of my notepads are at. That's the closest I have to like, write down an idea. Who should I talk to? Who are some of these guys?
So good. It's so good. I do that.
Yeah.
I'm an analog note taker for sure. And I've heard multiple people on this podcast say that, and I identify with that very much. It's different. It's different when you're writing it down and then you're forcing yourself to see it again. Because you have to digitize it, which is, I feel like, half the reason to do it. And then you're like, oh, what? I cannot read my handwriting. And then you're like, uh-oh.
Inevitably, it's going to bring out like new questions or what have you, or it's going to, I think in the process of transcribing it, I guess, it's going to bring out either a new idea or a more refined version of that idea. But I think getting it down, it's like when you have, HR money bags or what have you, me, Pod McDuck or what have you, like, can you take this note? Take this note. I need a good man on the morrow for this episode. And it's kind of that for me, but really getting that note down. And, I feel like I need to partner with maybe a notepad maker or something. Like, here's the truth in this art branded notepad. Get all these things down. There's a few ideas. We'll workshop it, put it out in the universe. Manifestation. It's fine. Talk about the artist lifestyle. And it's something about it. Like, I think it's often misrepresented. The whole starving artist conversation. It's like, we need to be thriving artists. That's the thing. But there is a certain degree of freedom that could be baked in from the limited experience where I kind of ascribe to that sort of lifestyle. I was just like, I'll get there when I get there, man. I'm just out here in the universe, man. That's what I was doing for like a good year. And then reality hits like, ooh, bills. I am behind on a lot. And I need to buy less canvases and less gear because I was painting at the time. So for you, how do you describe like your viewpoint on that sort of artist lifestyle? What is your artist lifestyle like? And what does that sort of like artist lifestyle idea mean to you?
Yeah, I think it's doing too much and like not making any money. Yeah, no, that stereotype is unfortunate because we all want to dispel these stereotypes. But yeah, it does suck, doesn't it? It's I would say I'm at a good point in my life where I feel everything in my life is part of what you could consider an artist lifestyle. aside from the day job. So I know a lot of people, I'm sure, have a similar experience to me, but it has taken me a while to incorporate sort of living as sort of observing and being a human and all of that sort of being connected. I'm like very, if I'm in a certain space, I'm like very much in that space, and that's what I'm doing at the time. And that's what makes being here so hard, because it'll be at work. Nothing else can come in. That's the headspace. You're in your studio. That's the headspace. And those spaces are super duper important because certain things happen in those spaces. But something that for some reason I just wasn't doing before for whatever reason was, I was reading, I was taking classes, and they weren't necessarily, everything felt kind of disjointed and separate. Like I was trying to like take a new trajectory in life, or didn't know what trajectory in life I wanted to do. And sort of recently I was like, oh, it's all just connected. Like being an artist is, writing these scripts. It is, making these animations. It is these 3D prints. It is all of these things can be connected. They don't have to be disjointed. So living the artist lifestyle for me has been sort of connecting, just acknowledging that like living and making in all of these different ways is who you are as an artist.
Yeah. I had to look at that recently in prepping for this talk, and I was looking at, like, I've been in the sort of data world and doing that side of things for almost as long as I've been a podcaster. Those things have run concurrently. And I even as you were just describing, I started thinking, I was like, my day job is probably my funder. If I'm looking at it, like I need a mic, we're not getting funding in that way that, some artists are getting or what have you, and they're able to sort of make that move when you're still in a spot where you need that full-time job for like healthcare, for sake of argument, or that's covering up for my space, my studio, if you will, which is in my home. I converted one of my bedrooms to a studio. All of that stuff is kind of covered. So I got to like shift my concept, and it's like I'm almost reporting to myself, as the person giving out the funding instead of talking to someone that, might not get it. I think it allows me to have more space to create. It just takes more from me. I
absolutely
have sort of less time, and I love the way that you put out having those spaces simple to, I'm doing this here and I'm doing this here. And there are going to be some instances where it overlaps. It's just like, I can't make that happen. I can't allow that to happen too often, because then it's just, but also there are instances where they serve each other, where, for me, outside of the money component and the health benefits, because my throat goes down, there's no podcast happening. It's just, I need to go through tonsils looked at. But it's one of those things where, in looking at the analytics, as we were talking about before we started, that comes from me having a data background. I can do storytelling based out of that. So I see those instances where they serve each other.
Yeah, that's great.
So I got two last real questions for you before we get to those rapid fire ones. Does your work fall closer to passion or curiosity, and why?
So in my work, curiosity is the driver, not just of content, but also techniques. A lot of times when I'm making a new body of work, there's something in there that is a new technique for me. This last exhibition, the one I just took down at School 33, it was hand-drawn animation, like the old school way. That was a very good COVID activity. I was very happy to discover this, and I really enjoy it a lot. It's very time consuming, but you can also listen to audiobooks. You can watch television. You can literally do whatever you want while you're doing it, which is great work, in my opinion. I'm like a morning, like thinker, concept-driven type person, and then in the afternoon, I like to do something really mindless and something just process-based. That you're doing something, but you're chilling. Yeah. And animation is very much a perfect afternoon, evening activity for me, where I can really get something done. And I'm doing that thing where I answer your question by saying both, by also saying passion is what's going to keep the work going, because you're only curious about animation for so long till you get to page 2000 of your animation and you're like, what's driving this now?
Yeah.
Something else beyond curiosity is driving this now.
But I like how you explained that, because I think, yeah, you start off with that, like when they say what piqued your interest, and it's like what's going to keep you coming back or what have you, and
Yeah, exactly.
It has to be passion baked into it.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, exactly.
As we kind of get into this last question, this is more of the pre-shameless plug part of the question. Tell us about your most recent work and the house that Daddy built.
I'm doing this crazy person thing where I'm telling a story about sort of the theft, violence, and greed that founded our country by looking at Virginia or Richmond as sort of this space where my aspirations of becoming an architect as a child come to fruition as in this sort of child remake of the rebranding of Altria in 2003 that happened when I was growing up. Altria is the company that owned Philip Morris and rebranded itself into, well, it was Philip Morris and it rebranded itself into a lifestyle company with this pretty rainbow logo. And,
oh, no.
If you go to Richmond, they're the sponsor of absolutely everything. And so growing up, we saw this like this underlying current throughout all arts programming, throughout all theater program. Everything is Altria. So I wanted to play the role of the architect of the rebranding of their new headquarters that they had built when I was growing up.
That's great.
And the sculptures, some of the sculptures represent these sort of three areas that I was thinking of as the id, the ego, and the super ego of both me and this company. Is like I'm contending with the toxic masculinity and white supremacy that are all tied within, my experience, the place I grew up, and this company's history and legacy. And Richmond's a very interesting place too, because I discovered sort of late, because they don't teach you this stuff in elementary school, that those monuments that have been in the news, those were not put up in the Confederate era at all.
Right.
They were put up way later. No one told us that. So I found that out way later, but that's sort of like indicative of kind of the time and the space of that. And so I'm trying to work all these too many things into this work by having this like lobby space, a bunker space, and a video. Yeah. Video's been shot. I'm editing it. And so the ICA is gone. That was my sort of, so we're at a pause with this work.
Yeah.
But I might have some good news to share soon. Someone emailed me recently about something, but I'm not going to say it. I probably can't say.
We'll stay tuned then.
Yeah, so that show might be happening, but in 2023. It was supposed to happen in 2022, but it should happen in 2023. And then my screenwriting fellowship is for a pilot television episode. And then I'm also writing another pilot television episode as part of a class I'm taking at Johns Hopkins. And then I might be a crazy person and apply for an MFA for the first time this winter. And then I'm also planning a wedding for June. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Wow.
Right now.
Lots of things. You're as busy as I am. So shout out to you.
Yeah, it's sucks. I mean, it's good and it sucks.
Yeah.
I'm like really, really excited that tomorrow is a half day. And then we have a few days off from work.
Yeah.
I love Thanksgiving as a side note. It is like the best.
I love Altria. It started the same year, was founded the same year I was born, and this great rainbow mosaic. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, isn't that good?
Yeah, it's so great, so informative. And
if you look up the graphic, there's like a graphic designpedia or something.
Yeah.
I don't remember where I saw it, but it was like it had some history of where the logo came from, and the logo came from the design company being inspired by their products on a shelf. Like that is how shallow of a logo it is. Those are the colors of their cigarettes, basically. And
as we wrap up here in these last few moments, I got 3 rapid fire questions for you.
Okay.
Brevity is key. Don't overthink them. Don't overthink them. And don't overthink them. So here's the first one. What is your most marked characteristic?
Most marked?
Yeah, when someone's like, yeah, that's definitely Travis.
People have brought up that I laugh very easily. as a thing, like I think people are hilarious, and I give credit where credit is due. And,
I do
don't
so
when it's not, but people are, I don't know, they're funny.
Yeah, I think so as well. It's like, I'm going to laugh at you. I don't know if you think it's funny. I'm going to laugh at you in your face. What is the last song that you listened to?
That is so weird that you asked that question, because literally this morning I was going through like my old hard drive of like when we had like iPods and stuff. Yeah. Like there's like an iTunes library on that thing, and I was like, I can put this on my computer.
Nice.
And I was dumping it and looking through and being like, I don't want to listen to any of this. I was like so excited to look at like my high school like iPod, and I was like, oh my God, I was a monster. Like so
no, please, that's funny. That's really funny, actually. It's like, what was I into?
Just like, I mean, it was just a lot of Flaming Lips and like Arcade Fire, which is fine. I mean, I wasn't a monster. I was just like, wasn't feeling any of that like alternative or indie like high school music today.
But
I thought about it.
That's good. That's good. This is the last one, and again, it's only going to be three things. Aside from money, because money is a little too obvious. What are three things that you think an artist needs?
To be on this podcast.
That's number one. You said it.
I found that time has been my number one want lately, as I'm sure you can identify with based on our conversation a second ago. Space is also very, very helpful. You can't make big, dumb foam sculptures without the space to do it in and store it in. I found that storage has become more of a problem too. As you make more, you got to make room to make more, and that sucks. And I would say community would be the other thing.
It's legit.
Since it can't be money. No, I'm kidding. Communities where...
So technically it's four. You mentioned four. So yeah, being on this podcast is number one. Just so y'all know, take a note there, guy. So with that, I'm going to again thank you for being on this podcast and chopping it up with me. And I'm going to invite and encourage you to tell the fine folks where to check you out, website, social media, all that good stuff. The floor is yours.
Yeah, it's my dumb long name in every way. So Instagram, dumb long name. My
that's great.
Website, dumblongname.com. You could really just Google my dumb long name, and there's not really another guy with my name. Well, there used to be like a guy who won a Purple Heart, but I've pushed him down. I
thought you were going in a different direction. Like, yeah, I got rid of him. Like, it's like Highlander.
Just like one 90s article. It couldn't, couldn't keep up.
That's really funny. So there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Travis Levasseur for coming on to the podcast. And I'm Rob Lee saying that there's art, filmmakers, community in and around your neck of the woods. You just got to look for it.